Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, you'll hear a very informative and what I think is a very helpful conversation with my guy, Patrik No C. Walker, talking about the conversation, trying to close out the week really strong for anyone who may be dealing with some mental health issues. This is a conversation you're not going to want to miss. It's all coming up on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for June 23rd, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
Hey, welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. And as always, my guy Ari does a great job each and every day making sure we're up on YouTube, we're looking good, sounding good, we're doing what we're supposed to do, and we definitely appreciate you checking out our YouTube page as well. We're almost up to about 7,000 subscribers, so we definitely appreciate that, and it's really come along pretty quickly, right? Something that I reluctantly got on, right? I mean, I made sure I stayed off for the longest, and then finally Ari's like, Q, I got you. I'll put you up on YouTube. We'll be good to go. So he's been holding it down. We definitely appreciate him. You can check him out on Twitter at Ari Producers. You can always hit me up on Twitter as well at your boy Q254. Today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL, and they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order. So again, definitely appreciate you checking out the show today on YouTube or just wherever you get your podcast. As you know, I'm on vacation, so kind of putting together a lot of these best of shows. Been doing it ever since, Wednesday, Thursday, today, and then we'll do it again on Monday and Tuesday, and then be back to new material come Wednesday on the 28th. But definitely appreciate you rocking with us and supporting the show as much as you do. And this conversation that you're going to hear today, I think, is very important. And really, this conversation is one that was near and dear to my heart as well. I've known Patrik Walker for a very long time. I know that mental health is something that he has really talked about quite a bit, going back to the time when I was in Central Texas, and he covers the Cowboys like a glove. He does a fantastic job, one of the best writers out there I know, but he's always leaned on the side of like mental health and trying to make sure everyone understood the importance of good quality mental health and what to do if you're struggling. And he is a guy who openly and honestly struggles with his mental health to the point where he's almost, he has, attempted to commit suicide. It's just really tough times, and he's overcame them, and now he's willing to talk about them. He actually has a podcast that he has out called The Konversation. And when we had this conversation on Raider Nation Radio 920 was, I think, 2 days or 3 days before the podcast was supposed to drop. I believe it was Memorial Day weekend, as a matter of fact. And the day that we were talking about was Monday, that we were all going to be off, but I wanted to make sure I tuned in and listened to the show. And it's really good and really informative. And anyone who could be dealing with mental health issues, I definitely encourage to listen to it and follow your heart, but definitely try to get as much help as possible, because mental health is definitely something that you don't want to play around with, and something that really, I think, came to my attention much later than it should have, right? It's something that I probably should have been aware of a lot earlier then, but you get so caught up in just go, and, do the show and work and do the show and work. And for me personally, just being always thinking about what I'm going to do next. And, okay, what's the next show? Okay, I got 3 hours. I got to, what would be good conversation? What's a good topic? What's a good guest to have? Like, always, the mind is always going. And so at some point I get to a point where I'm just kind of, I don't know if I'm coming or going, right? And there's a lot that goes into that. But, you just have to always take some time for yourself. And that's exactly why myself and the family are on vacation right now. And you're hearing the Best Of show, because normally I would just go, no breaks, no vacations, nothing like that. But the wife really got me last year to go on my first vacation, and I couldn't tell you how long. And when we were there, I decided that, hey, you know what? I kind of like this thing. I kind of like this vacation thing, so I need to at least attempt to do it once a year, and I probably should do it more than that just to kind of rest and reset. But Once a year is better than no times a year. So with nothing else to say about that, want to go ahead and jump into part one of the conversation with Patrik Walker. Again, Patrik, no C. It's Patrik, Patrik Walker. And so on Twitter, he always says Patrik, no C. But you can find him on Twitter at Voice of the Star. If you ever want to reach out and get some more information about what he's got going on, I definitely encourage you to reach out. But here's part one of the conversation, talking about The Conversation, which is his podcast, all focused around mental health. Patrik Walker, Cowboys.com. He's been covering the game of football for a very long time. I like to consider this guy my brother. I call him my brother because, well, he's been rocking with me for a long time. And Patrik, man, first, before we even get into the podcast, and I'm excited about this conversation, we've been having a jersey number conversation, and just like what people's favorite numbers were growing up. You've been covering sports for a long time, playing sports. What was your favorite number growing up and why?
Honestly, my favorite number has always been 13, and that's because it tends to be the most unlucky number as far as what people kind of, how they attach it. They say 13 is unlucky, and that's why some hotels don't have a 13th floor and things like that.
Yeah.
But for me, as an athlete and as a competitor, that made me love the number 13 that much more. And here's why, Q, because it strikes fear into people. Right?
Yeah.
That's why hotels don't have a 13th floor, because everybody's afraid to stay on the 13th floor. That's why people don't like the number 13, because they're scared that it's bad news. And whenever I was on the field, the baseball diamond, the basketball court, when I was running track and field, I always wanted to be the person that everybody was scared of. So I wanted to wear the number 13.
I love it. I would have never guessed that, but I love it. That's a great breakdown right there. I'm gonna, when I see Hunter Renfrow, I'm going to ask him. I'm going to say, hey, I had this great breakdown at number 13. What do you think? And I want to see what he says. That's fantastic, Patrik. And that's just part of the reason why we have you on the show, for dropping those kind of gems like that. But in all seriousness, man, I wanted to talk to you about your podcast, The Conversation, and that's conversation with the K, because there is no C. And on your tweet, it says, my mental health podcast is a literal lifetime in the making. And if the war inside of my own mind can somehow save you from yours, it won't be in vain. And it debuts on Memorial Day, which is next Monday. As you mentioned, it's been a lifetime in the making, but how did it all come together as you decided to put it in a podcast form at this point?
Well, for me, and this is me being completely open and vulnerable to just the world in general, literally, this has been a lifetime of my experiences that have molded me and brought me to this point. And this is something the podcast is. It's something that I've been wanting to do for years now. But to be frank with you, Q, I was stuck and trapped in the stigma of, because not only am I someone who battles for my mental health on a daily basis, combats depression and combats anxiety, but I'm a man that does it, and I'm a black man that does it. And, as you can relate, we're brought up in environments where we're told that it's weakness for you to express your feelings. It's weakness for you to seek help. It's weakness for you to speak on these types of things. And I was so trapped in that stigma that I realized recently that those trappings mentally and those things I needed to unlearn were the reasons that I was not doing the podcast, which means those were the reasons I wasn't using my life experiences and my testimony to help others. And that's not okay. That's not okay. I started to feel a guilt behind that. So I actually used that guilt constructively and kind of forced myself to dig deeper into myself and say, hey, you know what? If you can just save one person's life by showing them that, hey, you're not going through this alone. What you're experiencing, there are others experiencing it. And then with the platform that I've been blessed to be able to build up, a lot of times people, it hits them differently when they see someone that they kind of look up to saying, wow, he goes through it as well. She goes through it as well. Mm-hmm. So I want to be able to be a channel for that. And that's what the conversation is about. It's welcome. Everyone is welcome because the issues that we're dealing with absolutely transcend race, gender, political agenda, and whatever else we choose to try to allow us to divide ourselves as humans on a daily basis. At the end of the day, we're all going through things. We're all going through stresses. We all suffer and need to grieve and process. And the conversation is quite literally me, just a man who's been through the ringer, a survivor of multiple suicide attempts. And as I mentioned, I battle depression and anxiety on a daily basis. I have my ups have my great days. Today's been a great day. I'm having a great day. Tomorrow might not be a great day. But the conversation is about me being willing to to open myself up to the world on either one of those days and say, hey, this is what I'm going through. This is my coping mechanism. Seeking coping mechanisms. We'll have guests that come on, those that have some alternative methods of dealing with stress and depression and anxiety, PTSD, especially with Memorial Day coming up. But we also have clinical psychiatrists that are coming on, those that are medically licensed to have these conversations. So it's going to kind of span the gamut on what we talk about, because at the end of the day, it's really just about relating to someone else who's dealing with the same things that you're dealing with. And I just kind of want to be a channel for that.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and it's obviously needed in a major way. And again, we're talking with Patrik Walker. We're talking about the podcast, The Konversation, all dealing with mental health. And Patrik, I've been rocking with you for a long time. I've heard you speak on mental health before, so I know that this is something that is near and dear to your heart. But for a lot of people that watch and read your work on Cowboys.com, they're like, oh, this guy is so knowledgeable in football. He's got the Cowboys covered. He's got the NFL covered. So they don't know. How difficult is it to identify when maybe a loved one near you is going through some things and you don't know it? But, like, how do you identify someone that could be going through something?
Well, it's about, communication. And a lot of times, the problem is, and I can speak on this from an empathy standpoint, it's not always easy to recognize the signs of depression. And unfortunately, so often, just not only in this country but around the world, there are families who are dealing and grieving with the loss of a loved one who to suicide because they feel like they missed the signs. And you're not always going to see the signs, because if that particular individual is very proficient at masking them, then good luck with that. So at the end of the day, what you can do as a family member, what you can do as a friend, what you can do just as a neighbor is have conversations with those that are close to you, because sometimes it's as simple as asking, how are you today? Because you may not know, but there are a lot of people who don't get asked that question. And so that door is never open for them to communicate and vent what they might be going through. It might be as simple as, giving a person an affirmation saying, hey, you're great. You're doing great. Because the smallest thing might get them to kind of soften that mental defense that they have, and they might be able to open up to you. So ultimately, it's about letting the person next to you know, whomever that person might be, hey, I don't know if you're going through something or if you're not going through something, but I just want you to know that I'm here to listen if you ever want to talk. And you'd be surprised how often that will result in a conversation. And no pun intended, that's the reason why I call this podcast The Konversation, because it's, like I said in the mantra for the podcast, Q, silence invites tragedy. Words invite healing. Sometimes it's really just about speaking and letting someone know that, hey, I don't know what you're going through, but I just want you to know if you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen.
So there's part one of the conversation right there with Patrik Walker. And again, we're going to go 3 segments long with this conversation. It was really good stuff, very detailed stuff. And he was very open and honest with myself and Damon on Radio Nation Radio 920, just talking about his experiences and what he does and what he needs to do to continue to try to stay right with his mental health and the struggles that he deals with each and every day. So that was part 1 of the conversation. We'll come back in segment number 2. Part 2 of the conversation, actually, my man Damon will start off with a couple questions talking about mental health and his experiences as well. So that's coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, and we'll get to that right after I tell you about the title sponsor, which is Birddogs. And Birddogs, they just make you look good. Birddogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. And that's what everyone wants, right? Everyone wants to look thin and fit and trim, and that's cool. Well, Birddogs is going to help you do that. Birddogs shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. Birddogs fix this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches, so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Birddog uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. If you're checking out their website, like I do all the time, birddogs.com, khaki shorts, gym shorts, Oxford shorts, bathing suits, liners, they've got a collection of everything. All you got to do is go check them out again, birddogs.com. Maybe you want pants. They have all kind of pants, stretch khakis, joggers, sweatpants. They have a wide variety, and even polos. If you're going out somewhere and you want to be comfortable but want to look good at the same time, they have polo shirts as well. So they've got just about everything that you can imagine, shorts, pants, polos. It's all at birddogs.com/collections. Just go ahead and check them out and make sure that you use the promo code so you get hooked up with that Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Again, birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL. They're going to throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with each and every order. Again, that's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. You're listening to the conversation about the conversation. Patrick Walker, Patrick No C Walker at Voice of the Star on Twitter. My good friend, been rocking with him for a very long time. Decided to start a podcast series about mental health and trying to help people with mental health. So we had a really extended, good conversation with him on Raider Nation Radio 920. And as we start off segment number 2, it's Damon, my guy Damon, asking questions and also sharing stories about his own side of mental health. So here's part 2 of that conversation with Patrick Walker.
Yeah, Patrick, you touched on it a little bit there in your last answer, but how do you get people to open up when it's just like, or how willing are people to open up, and you and yourself and your personal experience about, hey, guys, when someone says, hey, how's your day going? Most of us, we just think, hey, that's just going to be a quick, hey, they're just asking that because it's, it's the thing to do where your coworker asks or a friend asks, hey, man, what's up? But you don't want to open up too much. So how has it been for you to get people to open up to you more?
That's a two-way street, and that's a fantastic question. It's a two-way street. So as much as the conversation is about me speaking to those who are also dealing with mental health struggles, it's speaking to those who may not be dealing with them at that particular moment, because let's be clear, you're not going to live on this planet X amount of years and not have to deal with a mental health issue. So if you make it past the age of 4 or 5, you're probably going to run into a mental health issue. So as adults, we've all struggled, and we're all struggling at different points. But my point being, if you're in a situation where you're not necessarily the one struggling, you need to be able to recognize how to communicate to someone that is struggling, because speaking from my standpoint, I don't do well when you pull me. And there are a lot of people who are the same. So if you're trying to pull something out of me, you're decreasing the chances of you actually getting what you're looking for. Personally speaking, I respond much better to an open dialogue and you letting me know, hey, when you're ready to talk, I'm here. So you're going to have your general pleasantries, the hey, how you doing? And yes, let's be honest, some of those are just going to be generic, and it's just, the polite societal thing to do. But what you shouldn't do as someone who's battling depression or anxiety or anything like that, never assume that's the case. So it may not be upon you at the moment to say, hey, all they did was ask me how I was doing, that I don't know that that they actually care. Or see, now you're justifying remaining internal as opposed to opening up. Because opening up, there's not much bad that can happen. Okay, let's say your neighbor comes up to you and they say, hey, how are you doing today? And you feel like you overshare. Well, if that were the case, you'll see signs that you're oversharing from your neighbor, because they might get a little uncomfortable, a little awkward. But see, this is where the conversation splits into two paths. Addressing the neighbor needs to understand exactly how difficult it is for you to be able to share in the first place, let alone overshare. So it's respecting the boundaries in both directions, and you're going to have to kind of feel it out. But the worst thing you can do is assume that no one cares, regardless of what they say to you. So if 10 people come to you and they say, hey, how are you doing? Somebody in that group cares. But if you assume none of them care and you assume that all 10 of them are simply being polite, you're doing yourself a great disservice, because the help that you needed is somewhere in that bunch. That's why you can't shut the door to the entire bunch. And if that means that you accidentally overshare with persons 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it doesn't necessarily go the way you want, continue to stay open to help, because person number 6, I guarantee you, that's the one that might save your life.
And something else I want to ask you about is when it comes to seeking out mental health professionals, because I've dealt with these issues that you've alluded to with yourself as well. So where's that fine line of, hey, I can talk to my friend or a sibling and I can feel a little bit better, but there's still these issues, and now I need to take that next step and see a professional?
you will actually feel that within yourself. And this is also going to be key. And I want everyone to understand that when they tune into the conversation, one of the first things that I will lead with on every single episode is I am not a mental health professional. I am someone who struggles with it. This is the purpose of the podcast. This is why I'm here, to be relatable so we can have these conversations on that level. But that's why I'm also inviting, and I've already penciled in several guests, and some of those are clinical psychiatrists and clinical counselors and those who are licensed in the field. And the reason I'm doing that is because even though I'm an open ear to you and those others who suffer, I recognize that there's a limit to what I can provide to you. At a certain point, you're going to have to get another resource involved, and that's where the listener needs to understand at what point in what they're hearing does there need to be that line to say, hey, thank you for sharing that with me, but I think it's time to move into bringing someone in. And a perfect example of that would be, and Q, you mentioned it, I've been very passionate about mental health for a very long time, especially on Twitter, kind of getting that word out. And my DMs have always been open to getting to having those conversations. And there have been several conversations that have unfortunately gotten to the point where this particular person or that particular person began to genuinely contemplate suicide. And I know what those signs are because I'm a survivor of it. So I've been to that cliff before. So when it gets to that point, that's when I say, as a listener, as an open ear, I say, hey, it's time to bring someone in. And then you start adding resources. So as the person who's suffering, keep an eye on what that person that you're speaking, on who that person you're speaking to, keep an eye on what they can or can't do, because you also don't want to overwhelm them. So if you feel like the next thing you're about to say is going to be, unfortunately, hopefully not, but if it's that particular thing that you feel may be too heavy for them, just kind of preface it. Say, hey, this next thing I'm going to tell you, I don't know how you're going to take this, but here we go. And you put it out there and you gauge their reaction. And if their reaction is not exactly pleasant, then that might be an indication that it's time to bring in a professional. And for me, that's how I ended up in therapy in the first place. And I'm in therapy as we speak now. It finally took me, going back to what I was saying, a man and a man of color. That's a lot of taboos to overcome. But I finally bit the bullet and said, I can't do this by myself. I can't do this even with my support system. My support system is fantastic, but they are limited as well. Sooner or later, you have to bring in a professional depending on what the severity of your mental health struggle might be. And not everyone needs therapy. So I'm not here to say, hey, everyone in the world needs therapy, but a lot of us do. And those of us that do need to have the internal strength to look in the mirror and say, hey, this is how I can probably save my life. And keep in mind, not only do those around you need you, but you need you. And every decision you make, good or bad, left or right, you're going to impact both yourself and your loved ones. And as a family man, and I have children, I look at them every day and they help me kind of push forward. So find your motivation, find the support system. And even if your support system is going to start with the conversation, I promise you, if you subscribe, it won't be where it ends, because I'm going to keep throwing resources at you to make sure that you are good as many days as you can be good, but not every day, because that's not realistic. So even on those bad days that you're struggling, I got you.
So there was part 2 of our conversation with Patrik Walker from Raider Nation Radio 920, just talking all things mental health and different questions to be asked. And we're going to keep the party going in segment number 3. I'll get back to starting things off, asking questions about asking for help. And a lot of times people don't want to ask for help, but you need to. If that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do, right? There is no shame in asking for help. So we'll get into part 3 of that conversation coming up in segment number 3 here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, and part 3 of the conversation with Patrik Walker, talking about the conversation. That's conversation with the K. He has no C in his name, so there is no C in conversation. It's the conversation with the K. Patrik Walker, again, Voice a Star on Twitter. You can check him out if you have any questions, want to find his show. I definitely encourage you to go check it out. But here we go. As we start off segment number 3, I'm asking questions about asking questions and asking for help, and the fact that there should be no shame in asking for help. Here's part 3 of the conversation with Patrik Walker. He is Patrik Walker. You can find him on Twitter at Voice of the Star. And, you're talking about resources, and I'm so grateful for this segment. I think it's very helpful for a lot of people out there listening. But for someone that looks and says, well, professional help. I don't know. They might look at me a little, funny style if I say that I need professional help. What would be the answer or response that you would give them, Patrick?
Don't label your intent. Don't label your intent. I call that labeling the intent when it's, I know what I need to do, but I'm afraid of the label that gets put on what I need to do. So instead of saying, outwardly, well, I'm going to seek professional help, you don't have to label it as such. You're simply seeking help. Mm-hmm. Just keep it in that particular, description. Because once you start saying professional help, then you start, in my experience, you find yourself battling those same taboos and stigmas that you were trying your best to snap out of and to unlearn. And unlearning is a process because keep in mind, childhood legally lasts 17 to 18 years in the United States, right? So for that, let's say 17 years, the majority of that 17 years, you are being taught things. And those things that you're being taught by your parents or whomever your guardians might have been or whatever the situation might be. But the people teaching you, they might not understand that they don't wholly believe what they're teaching, but since they were taught it, they're going to teach it the same way. And that's what we call generational curses, right? So if you find yourself in a situation where you're terrified of getting help because it's professional help, because if you tell anyone that you're getting professional help, particularly in communities of color, you're crazy, right? Mm-hmm. What are you doing? That in part of my language, but for those in color, you know this. Oh, well, that's white people stuff. Well, no, because last I checked, everybody has a brain, and everybody that has a brain has a mind, and everybody that has a mind struggles with stress and struggles with things that knock them on their backside, and they have to get up from. So I'm very passionate about this because I want people to understand that seeking professional help is not a weakness. Seeking help, period, is not a weakness. It is a strength. It is the thing that will save your life. The weakness is the lie that you allow yourself to tell yourself about seeking help. If you allow yourself to sit there and be depressed and be anxious and you never want to step outside into society and put a hand out and say, hey, could you please just sit down with me? I have something I want to talk to you about. That is courage. It takes courage to step outside of yourself to seek help. The weakness is you sitting in a dark room, allowing yourself to spiral to what could ultimately be your demise and what was ultimately my demise on 3 separate occasions. So when I say I know what it feels like to shut yourself in and over-internalize and take on far more than you need to because you've been told that that's what defines strength, you were lied to. So it's time to start telling ourselves the truth because until we do, we will not seek the help we need and we will not make it as individuals and most certainly not as a society.
Patrick, I've got to ask you, when it comes to going and seeking help for yourself personally, how long did it take for you to realize, hey, this is benefiting me, these steps are beneficial? Because for me, I had one therapy session for myself last year, and after that one, I said to myself, this is kind of stupid. Never went back. But for you, how long did it take you to say, hey, man, this is good for me, and I'm getting the tools that I need to help myself going forward?
It took a long time, and I've not been as consistent with it as I need to be. This is me being open, honest, transparent, and vulnerable. I will be 43 in July. It took me, my third suicide attempt, thankfully, was over 15 years ago, but I didn't go into my first therapy session until I was around 36, I want to say. Now, by that time, I had already attempted suicide 3 times. Now, I think back and I wonder if I would have even had one attempt if I had started therapy at 18 or 19 or something like that. But hindsight is 20/20. Foresight is what matters most. But I started at around 35, 36. I had 2 or 3 sessions, and I found myself judging myself in the session, which is exactly what you did. So instead of listening actively to what the counselor and the therapist was telling me and trying to get me to open up and talk about some of my complexes and struggles and my cognitions that were created because of certain things that happened in my childhood, half of me was talking and the other half of me silently was judging myself. What are you doing here? Why are you sitting? What are they going to tell you that you don't already know? This is ridiculous. Are you really paying $75 for this? And what would if your mom found out about this? What about your brother? If your brother found out about this, he's going to clown you into oblivion. I'm judging myself as I'm in there supposedly seeking help. And that is a huge detriment. When you go into therapy, go in there with the complete open mind, go in there being non-judgmental of yourself, because the therapist is there to help you, not to judge you. So why are you judging you? You're judging you based on your experiences and your environment and the people that you're around. And ultimately, and I'll be very clear on this, if you're worried about the people around you judging you for seeking help, surround yourself with new people.
Right. Facts.
Period.
Yep.
And ultimately, I started therapy. I judged myself for the first couple of sessions, and like you, I stopped. And I stopped for about a year and a half, and I fell back into the darkness. Now, outwardly, couldn't tell, because career-wise, I was still progressing. This because I was throwing myself into my career to avoid having to deal with myself on a daily basis internally. I always had to be doing something. So it's beautiful for your career because you're grinding, but you're dying on the inside. So about 2 years of that, I finally got back into it because I woke up one morning and I couldn't get out of bed, and I couldn't eat. I had no appetite for about a week. Prior to that, I was losing weight, and I found myself being paranoid, and, I was just a terrible person to be around outside of work. So I could put the mask on at work, but when I got home, I was destroying relationships. I wasn't the father I wanted to be. So ultimately, I got back into therapy, and I've been back in ever since.
Man, it's a hell of a story. Hell of a testimony right there. That's just a sample size of what you're going to get from the conversation. Again, the podcast by Patrik Walker starting on Memorial Day as Mental Health Awareness Month gets wrapped up. But, Patrik, I'm so glad that you're putting this project together because, again, I know I've been rocking with you for a long time. You've been talking about this, and I can tell you by our text messages that we're receiving how important just the conversation we've had today has already been a big impact on a lot of people's lives. So, again, at Voice of the Star, and the podcast drops on Memorial Day. Get it anywhere you can get your podcast. Anything else you want to tell us about the show that we should expect?
Listen, I just want to thank you, Q. Thank you guys for having me on, giving me a platform to help promote this. And this is my baby. This is something that I'm ultimately passionate about. So primarily, ladies and gentlemen, if you download the Patreon app, search for The Konversation with a K, or if you are on your laptop or desktop, go to patreon.com, search for it. Also, the YouTube channel is youtube.com/Patrik Walker Conversation, and it's Patrik with no C. And I just thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The debut episode, like you said, is going to be on Memorial Day. I've already got at least one guest. I'm working on another guest, and the focus on that one, so apropos to Memorial Day, it's going to be the issue of PTSD in surviving veterans, the transition from tour to normal life as a soldier. And that's the first conversation we're going to have, and we're going to have it on Memorial Day. And from there, we're going to grow it out and expand out from there. So please, please, please tune in. And even if you don't tune in, if you never watch an episode of The Konversation, if you never follow me for resources, just find help. And if you're contemplating suicide, please dial either 911 or 988, and 988 is the Suicide Crisis and Lifeline number. So please seek help, even if it's not through me.
Hey, fantastic stuff, man. We're going to have to do this again. Really are. I mean, like I said, it's been a very helpful conversation for a lot of folks out there. Patrik, thanks so much for sharing your time, and I'll be locked in on Monday, that's for sure.
Hey, blessings to you, brothers. I'll talk to you soon.
So there it is right there. Hopefully you enjoyed that. And I actually had a couple people hit me up by way of text message when they heard that first original interview on Raider Nation Radio 920. Was like, man, Q, can you give me a little bit more information from Patrik? That sounded like a conversation and a podcast that I really need to listen to just to try to get my mind right and get myself in a good place. And that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to talk Raiders all the time, of course, but at the same time, if that conversation that you just heard from Patrik Walker, if that helps one person, two people, three people, then that's all good. Then I'm very satisfied with the job at hand, and definitely encourage you to go check out what Patrik Walker has going on. Again, at Voice of the Star on Twitter, you can find him and you can find all his work, writings that he does, and also the podcast that he does, The Konversation. So that's going to do it for today's show. It's going to do it for this week. Going to head into the weekend. Again, still on vacation with the family. Monday and Tuesday will be more best of shows, and then we'll be back to regular programming come Wednesday on the 28th. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, enjoy your weekend. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.